Hello again. Welcome back to week 47 of the fifth year of the Religious Education Initiative. This is day 2. Last time we finished the homily of St. Gregory the Theologian on the Feast of Theophany from the year 381 when he was the new bishop of Constantinople. We will wrap up this fifth year of the Religious Education Initiative by reading another homily delivered around the same time, probably a few months before the Theophany homily, so sometime in 380. In this homily, we will see St. Gregory address similar themes, but somewhat more directly and more concisely than in the other. So this is Oration 20, entitled On Theology and the Office of Bishops. He says, "When I am confronted with the long-windedness so prevalent today among the instant experts and ordained theologians, who think that they have only to wish it and they are wise, I yearn for the supreme wisdom, and like Jeremiah I seek out a wayfarer's lodging place, and I feel the need to withdraw by myself. Nothing appeals to me more than by blocking out my senses, severing all ties with the flesh and the world, placing myself beyond the reach of human concerns except for the unavoidable, and communing with myself and with God, to live the life that transcends visible nature, ever containing within myself the reflections of the divine, their purity unclouded by the false images here below, and to be, and ever come to be, a spotless mirror, as it were, of God and the divine, capturing light with light, and the brighter through the more dim, until we reach the fount of those rays that penetrate human existence, and we finally attain the blessed goal, our mirrors shattered by the reality of truth. For whether one were to pursue the study of philosophy in depth and gradually dissociate the noble and luminous element of the soul from the slough of darkness to which it is tied, or were to meet with a propitious God, or were successful in both respects, and were to devote himself wholeheartedly to the contemplation of reality on high, it would only be with difficulty that he could gain mastery over the world of matter that drags him down. But before we rise above it as far as possible and sufficiently purify our ears and minds, I think it is dangerous either to accept the responsibility for other souls or to take up theology. And so that you will not think me an inveterate worrier, but may actually commend me for my prudence, I shall explain how I come to be apprehensive on this score, by citing the testimony of Moses himself when he heard the words of God. A great number had been summoned to the mountain, including Aaron and his 2 sons, who were priests. The rest were all bidden to worship from afar. Only Moses was to approach. The people were not to go up with him. Now shortly before this, lightnings and thunder and trumpets in the mountain wrapped in smoke, and dire warnings and similar terrors kept the others down below. It was truly a great thing for them simply to hear God's voice, and this only after they had been thoroughly purified. But Moses went up and entered the cloud and spoke with God and received the law. For the multitude, the law of the letter; for those above the multitude, the law of the Spirit. I am familiar, too, with the stories of Eli the priest, and shortly after him Uzzah. The one paid the penalty for his children's outrageous behavior in desecrating the sacrifices, and this despite the fact that he had refused to endorse their impiety, but had on the contrary administered to them many a rebuke on many occasions. Uzzah, on the other hand, dared merely to touch the ark, which had been jostled from its place by the ox, and though he managed to save it, he himself perished. In this way did God preserve the sanctity of his ark. I know, too, that the multitude could not touch even the walls of the sanctuary with impunity. It was for this reason that other exterior walls were required, and that the sacrifices themselves could only be consumed by deserving persons and at a sanctioned time and place. No one so much as dreamed of entering the Holy of Holies and looking upon or touching the curtain or the mercy seat or the ark. So, knowing these things, and that no one can be worthy of our great God, who was both victim and high priest, unless he first presents himself to God as a living sacrifice, or rather becomes a living, holy temple of the living God, how could either I myself blithely launch into a discussion about God, or countenance anyone who without further ado does the same? That is not a commendable ambition. The attempt is fraught with peril. In fact, this is why one must first purify oneself, and then enter into converse with the pure, if we are not to share the fate of Manoah, and when we have beheld a vision of God, declare, "We are destroyed, dear wife, we have seen God." Or like Peter, urge Jesus to leave the boat because we are unworthy of so great a presence. Or like the centurion in the Bible, seek healing, but decline to receive the healer. So long as any one of us is a centurion with more than his share of wickedness, and still in the service of Caesar, the universal ruler of creatures that creep on the ground, let him likewise say, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. But when I see Jesus, though I am small in spiritual stature, like the famous Zacchaeus, and climb the sycamore, putting to death what is earthly in me, and wasting my lowly body, then I shall both receive Christ, who will say to me, Today salvation has come to this house, and I shall obtain salvation, and live a more perfect life, distributing in virtue what I have garnered in wickedness, be it in coin or in doctrine. So, this is a nice introduction. He's saying we're going to talk about theology, but, he says, first he says, I'm troubled. He says he's troubled by the fact that he's surrounded by so many people who are trying to be theologians. He doesn't want to talk to them. He wants to leave. He wants to go out of the world and in privacy, in solitude, devote himself to the things of God. And he says then, he talks about two ways of trying to approach. He talks about studying philosophy. Now, this really, when he speaks, and all the Cappadocian Fathers speak, he's talking about the ascetical life. But there does seem to be some sense of the intellectual pursuits or the or simply meeting with God, I guess, who is merciful. Again, the last paragraph of the first section, really the entirety of the first paragraph is a meditation on approaching God. And he's speaking about prayer, he's speaking about fasting, he's speaking about solitude. He does seem to be speaking somewhat about the study of Scripture, the study of philosophy, but I think the idea is one might gradually do this, or one might simply receive mercy. He might meet with the propitious God. So maybe there's a reference to St. Paul on the road to Damascus. But regardless, he's saying we need to not enter into this effort lightly, and especially not talking about theology. Talking about theology, he is saying, is not theology. And then he gives examples from the Old Testament of how cautious it was necessary for people to be before they approached the holy things, talking about the sanctity of the house of God, that the people were not even allowed to touch it, or the mountain, or the ark. They were all to stay away and listen. And yet, now we are commanded to approach. So he says, if we're going to approach God, we need to be prepared. We need to purify ourselves. And that word purify ourselves, we need to understand, does not mean we have to be perfect and holy before we meet God. We're speaking about, the sense is ritual impurity. We need to intentionally lay aside the cares of life. We cannot be living a life that is entirely given to the pleasures of this world and then approach God and expect it to work. We need to intentionally lay these things aside. And we may struggle to do so. We may be unable to do so. It may be difficult for us. And this is why I think he makes the example of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus had not yet laid everything aside, but he climbed the sycamore. He made an effort. And then he was willing to lay aside and give everything up. So, again, the examples that he gives interpret his words. We need to purify ourselves if we would approach the Lord, which at the very least means we need to recognize we still have a share in wickedness. We are still in the service of the ruler of this world. And we need to approach the Lord first, asking to be purified, not seeking to define and determine who he is. This needs to be the way in which we come to the Lord. So that, I think, is probably enough of me trying to interpret St. Gregory the Theologian, God forbid. But we'll see more next time. For now, God bless you all. We'll see you shortly for day 3.